top and an open document like that. All right, here's the idea. A bit of an introduction. So, the idea is just to talk craft a little bit and talk about writing and also get writing from people. Okay, here's how this all started. I'm spending a lot of time editing short stories for anthologies that I'm putting out with John Joseph Adams, and for my own short stuff that's going in various works. And while I'm editing these stories, I always think, man, I wish I could have watched this process as a writer before I started doing it, because I would learn a whole lot from seeing the comments and the corrections that people provide to other writers. And then it reminded me of my very first book that before I was ever published, I sent a manuscript out and got feedback from a friend of mine named Jill Martin Clements, who I just knew online. And the feedback and the edits and the corrections she gave me taught me more about writing than I had known up to that point. Hey, what's up, Daryl? Daryl, you're a great writer. What are you talking about? And you've got more important things to do, or is it, since it's past the trade deadline, you don't work anymore now? Congrats last night. So exciting watching the Rockets play when the open threes are going in. I learned a lot from getting edits on that first draft. And then I got a publishing offer from a small press, Norlights Press. And when I sent the draft off to them, I got hooked up with one of the founders of the press, who was my editor. And she started sending back edits on chapters, and I realized things that I was doing wrong grammatically. And I started going back and revising the manuscript ahead of her to at least solve those problems, and sending those chapters back to her. And then I would find out new problems I was making. And this relationship with the editor basically made me a better writer, taught me pretty much everything I know about writing came from an interaction with her, with Jill Martin Clements, with my mom, who's a huge first reader of mine, and with John Joseph and all the editors I've worked with. So I've got some of my favorite writing books here I want to recommend people. And the idea was to actually try to talk about what makes for good writing. And a lot of books have done this and played with this. But it's one of those things that you can't quantify, so we don't talk about much. We just know it when we see it. It's a lot like great music. There's certain rules you have to obey when you perform music. You have to play within the octaves, and you have to play chords that are harmonious and resonate with each other. And breaking those rules just to be avant-garde ends up creating unpleasant sounds that aren't just unpleasant subjectively, it's unpleasant objectively. Our bodies are not blank, our brains are not blank slates that will accept any kind of story or any kind of data. We're looking for certain kinds of information. Our eyes are like this. There's certain colors that clash, that if you put them side by side, like greens and reds, it looks like they're in motion. It's just the way our rods are set up. Our ears are set up to vibrate at certain harmonic resonances, and when we hear a pleasant note, like, we know it deep down. When we hear something that clashes, we also know it. We feel it in our bones. So an idea that I have, and I think it's a decent idea. I don't think there's much to argue with. Is that writing has that same. Our brains have a certain expectation for good writing, and when we encounter it, we know it. And when we encounter the opposite, we also know it. And storytelling needs to be a good story, but it has to be told with resonant notes, so it doesn't. So it's not off-putting. And so I want to explore some of those resonant and discordant writing styles by looking at my own writing, by looking at what some of the greats have said, and by taking submissions and looking at what people are doing great and making suggestions on where a great sentence could be made even better. And that's where it's going to start with craft, but we're also going to look at plot, look at how people open their stories, look at how people submit their stories and how they format their documents. And it's going to be, as you can tell by this introduction, it's going to be so scattered, it's going to be unprepared, it's going to be, I'm not going to do a lot of post editing with any of this because honestly I just don't have time. But what I do have time is to spend an hour or two a week compiling some stuff together, showing you some thoughts and putting it out there, and hopefully it'll find an audience one day that gets something out of it. In the meantime, I will recommend 3 of my favorite books to make you a better writer, and then suggestions on how to punch up your writing even more. This is the first book I recommend to anyone who wants to be a writer. It's called Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott. I'm going to read a passage from here later. I will warn you, I'm an emotional reader, and a couple of things I've picked out to read will make me start crying, so you'll have to deal with that. This is a great book about motivating yourself to write. There's certain chapters that you should fold down and highlight. They'll be different for each reader, and it's the kind of, you're sitting there and you're not feeling sure about yourself and your writing career, and you're not feeling sure about your writing, and then you go read that chapter, and Anne gives you a kick in the pants, and then you sit down and start writing again, and your writing is better. Her prose is so good. I'll sample that and read from that probably a couple of times in this series. Everybody knows this book. He's, you know what I love about Stephen King? He's one of the best writers of all time, and he writes in genre. And it just destroys the idea that great writing has to be not have interesting stories or not have fantastical, magical elements or horror or science fiction. He's written it all, and he writes great, but he writes about the craft of being a writer as well as anybody. So those are my 2 favorite books on being a writer. If you want to be a writer and you haven't read these, like, do that first before you watch the rest of this video. The idea with this series is I want to try to help people who want to make a career in writing. Doesn't mean you're going to make a livable wage maybe, but it means that you're going to treat it like you would treat something beyond hobby, like more important to you than just a hobby. So it might be a second career for a while, but you're going to take it seriously. And I don't think you can give yourself a good shot or take this seriously if you don't study the greats, read some of the classics, and try to punch up your craft. There's going to be a lot of asides. There's going to be like a Family Guy kind of thing, except I won't be doing jumps in time for the asides, but when something occurs to me, I'll just pop it out. I think one of the hardest things about being a writer is that it's easy for all of us to do it a little bit. So we all think of ourselves as writers, and it makes us not want to learn the skills it takes to be a professional writer. Not all of us can pick up a guitar and strum a few chords. So when we want to learn the guitar, we're like, okay, shit, what is this thing? We have to learn what a fretboard is and what keys are, how to strum, how to get rhythm, the basics. We know nothing about it except we've heard it, we like it, we think it looks interesting, but we learn it from the ground up. The challenge with writing, and you'll see this with reading other people's writing, starting off as a writer and reading your own stuff, is that because we can all write something, we can write emails, we can write blog posts and Facebook updates and assignments for class, we think, well, I know how to do that. And then we sit down and try to write a novel using the tools that we know from the other writing in our life. And it doesn't work that way. The writing that you know is just like as much about the craft of writing as having listened to a guitar solo. It doesn't mean you can go out and play it. So I think the fact that writing is something we can all do to some degree fools us into thinking that being writing a short story, writing a novel just means trying a little bit harder. It doesn't. It means you have to go out and be a big reader. You have to read not just in the genre and in the format that you want to write, but you got to read outside your comfort zone. You need to read, read mysteries and read love stories and read classics and read literature and read it all, because you're going to absorb the tools that you need for your own writing through all of it. But it also means doing the work. Like people who go study writing get assigned these books. Well, you don't have to go pay for an expensive college degree to read these books. You could just get a library card, or order these on Amazon, or get them on your Kindle. This is another one that I highly recommend. This might be, actually, I would maybe even read this one before On Writing and Bird by Bird. This is laugh out loud, addictive, hilarious, one of the funniest books you'll ever read, and it's about grammar, one of the most boring subjects ever. You'll learn more grammar from this one book than you learned in your first 12 years of life, and more than I learned in college writing classes. It's so good. It's one of those books that I reread all the time just because it's so witty. So you'll find other books too. Go, get other people's suggestions. I love, I could go through these comments and just read about that, read what you guys are saying all day. Raw uncut editing. I love that. Yeah, I'm not editing my video, but this is a video about editing. So check these books out. I'll put links to them if I make this video like a permanent thing on YouTube. Okay, one other suggestion. Find the book that you love that makes you want to be a better writer, because the prose is so good. I think everyone has that book, and it will change over time. For me, for the last about 5 years, that book has been this one. This is less a book recommendation, though I recommend this book to everyone. It's probably my favorite book of all time. It's not a book recommendation. It's a recommendation to find the book that you love that punches up your writing, and return to it. Read it over and over again. Figure out what it is that you love about the prose, and let it wash over you. I'm going to compare writing to music a lot because there's so many great metaphors. But when you're a musician, you listen to the greats over and over again, and you absorb it. And we have to do that with reading and writing. You can't just read a great book once and expect to really learn from it. You read it the first time and you get the story. You read it the second time and you get the prose. Read it the third time and you get the structure, and you realize how this story is laid out, how much weight the narrative had versus the dialogue, and the ups and downs of the story. We do this with TV and movies a lot. Like we watch films, 10 times, and we get to know it almost by heart. You need to have books that you do that with, so that you can get into the structural layer, like into the framework and the arches that you don't see from the facade, from the outside of the building. So I highly recommend finding that book you love and returning to it, reading it over and over again, especially if it's this is a rare book. I think not many people have heard of it, but especially if it's a best-selling book in your genre, what you aspire to, find out why it worked. Part of that's luck, and we'll talk a lot about luck in this series, because I will warn everyone that no matter how good you are and how hard you work, luck is going to play a big part. Here's another one. So I won't do that yet, but I got this book because when I was a bookseller, it drove me nuts how our best genre work we took out of the genre sections and put it in literature. We do that with King, we do that with Michael Crichton, even Margaret Atwood. As soon as it's great genre, we say, well, it can't be a genre because genre is not supposed to be good. So we take Frankenstein and War of the Worlds, and we move them into classics and literature. But I want to talk about on a whole different video why plot is more important than prose, because we're going to talk a lot about prose in this series, and I don't want anyone to think that this is like big L literature kind of thing. It's more about making sure that you find your voice and that you tell your story clearly. But I want to stress that the story is the most important part, and we're going to talk a lot about story and structure in this series as well. Okay, I'm going to just look at comments real quick and see what I'm missing out on. Someone says, hell yeah, this is going to be great. I love that people really want to watch paint dry and that people think this is good. My suspicion is this will be a popular series because writers are always looking for reasons to not write. And this is like you get to procrastinate and make you feel like you're working on your writing. Okay. I'm going to go through these comments and talk about them later. But I hear a lot of people. Well, one person surprised I'm wearing a shirt. Yeah, I'm in New York right now. It's not sunny South Pacific. Okay, I'm gonna read a couple of things just to get an idea of what we're looking for in our reading, and I'm not gonna try to. I don't want to reiterate too much of what I've already said, but I do want to probably mention every now and then that good writing, there is an objective quality to what makes good writing versus bad writing. So we need to own that as writers, that our writing can be objectively bad. If we don't believe that, if we think it's all subjective and someone will love it, we're never going to push ourselves to be the best writer that we can be. You can also edit a thing to death, and at some point you have to either let it go or start from scratch and try again. But knowing that there are things that are right and things that are wrong is very important to embrace. When it comes to grammar, you need to embrace that you might be using commas wrong. And when someone shows you how to use them correctly, it's no ego blow. You're learning things for the first time because if you're like me, you didn't learn much about grammar, even though you made it through 12 years of school. Thanks to the distraction from writing. I'm going to feel guilty if people are not getting writing done because of this. Okay, so there is right and wrong in writing, and embrace that. Don't let the ego get in the way of becoming a better writer. Join a critique group. Join a writing group. I was a member of this high country writers group in Boone, North Carolina, and it was so useful to me to learn how to give good critique because it starts with a compliment. What someone's doing great about their writing to soften the blow that's getting ready to come, and then tell them what didn't work and where they can improve. And the more it happens to you, at first, you're like, you want to make up an excuse. You want to explain why you did it. It's not useful. That's your ego just getting in the way of your growth as a writer. You have to listen and assume the reader is correct. It's just like any business. The customer is always correct. The reason people say that is because they know often the customer is wrong, but you have to treat them like they're correct. That's the only way you're going to find out why they're upset and what you can do to make things better. And the reader is the same way. They're always right. If they don't like something, find out why. It doesn't mean you write to please everybody. That's complete death when it comes to art. But it means that you learn about this interplay between writer and reader and how to use your impact on the reader and your knowledge about that impact as information and tools to get your story across. Something I'll probably talk about a lot, not just with the comparison between music and writing, is that storytelling started as an oral tradition. Writing came later. So the idea that we're not supposed to let our audience become a part of our storytelling is a very modern and I think wrong idea. We've been telling stories for tens of thousands of years, and that's what our brains are hardwired for. And that means we're hardwired to wonder what our audience is thinking and to even play on those expectations so that we know when to twist the story and when to drop a piece of dialogue. Like something I'm really big into on the writing side is the theory of mind that always has us guessing what other people are thinking. You have to be able to do that to create good characters, to write good dialogue, but it's most important to imagine what the reader is thinking while they're reading your prose, because that's the only way you can play with their emotions and guide them through the story and drop just the right amount of detail and not too much. So having that relationship with the reader is so important. The best place to find that is with other writers at first in critique groups and ask questions. And I learned so much from that process, and that's part of what this video is all about, like getting people exposed to how much fun it can be to dive into the weeds, to read about writing, to refresh ourselves with our favorite writing, and to work on our craft. Because even though I stress plot over everything, we can get so lost in our world and our story that we don't work enough on how to deliver that in the most sonorous voice possible. Okay, I'm going to read the start of chapter 31 of Margaret Atwood's Handmaid's Tale because it breaks a rule in starting a book that shows me how you can break rules but do it so well that no one cares. And I've done this in my own writing a couple of times, and I'll pull up an example later. I'll do it on the screen actually. But you always hear there's some good writing advice and there's bad writing advice. Bad writing advice is stuff like never start a story with the character opening their eyes or in a dream or becoming awake. The reason we have simple rules like that is because it's so hard to do it correctly that we want to save most people from the attempt to try it. But whenever I hear those rules, Patrice is in the house. Patrice has a good point. Make sure you read these comments if you can. Writing groups can devolve into picking nits. Yeah, find a good writing group, I would say, and Patrice would probably say as well. If your writing group's not great, try to make changes from within or get a new one. Rules about like not starting with the dream, like opening dream sequences can be great. Prologues can be great. They have to be executed wonderfully, and that's what is buried in those rules. That if you execute violations of those rules, great. That's probably not enough. You probably shouldn't do those things. If you can nail it, then definitely do it. The reader won't mind. They'll be so happy living in your words that they won't care that the structural thing you're doing is cliche. Margaret Atwood opens chapter 31 with this, and I think you can open a book. This could be the start of the novel, and no one would complain. It's so good. Every night when I go to bed, I think, in the morning I will wake up in my own house and things will be back the way they were. It hasn't happened this morning either. Okay, the reason I bring this up, I can't put this on the screen because it's in my physical book, but this is like, what, 2 sentences? Yeah, 2 sentences, 2 paragraphs. It's that short. If you open a novel with a line like that, I'm hooked. I want to know, like, what happens, what is normal, the fact that this person, I mean, the character building in those 2 sentences, we don't have a name yet, but we think about someone is perseverating on this fantasy that their life will go back to normal and that it hasn't happened this morning either. And it makes you want to, I have so many questions from those 2 sentences. Why those 2 sentences and not any other 2 sentences we could write about our life? This is where I think the universality of human nature and how our brains are wired for certain kinds of stories is so important. We've all felt that, you know? We've all, we understand what those emotions are. And I think and it doesn't matter that it's genre that's taking place in the future or the past. It can be fantasy, it can be science fiction. If you tell things about your emotions and your fears and your anxieties, it's going to resonate with lots of other readers out there because we have so much in common. We're practically the same people throughout time. It's why we can read Sir Gawain and the Green Knight from how many thousands of years ago, and the story makes sense. The Iliad and the Odyssey make sense. They were written in different languages, inside of different cultures, thousands of years ago, and we understand the fear of a husband who can't get home to his wife. And when he gets there, there's just legions of suitors. And how do you deal with the fact that your wife thinks you're dead and you're not? And how do you win her over and apologize for being gone? And what does it feel like when nature blows you off course? Like, if culture was as strong an influence on our beings as we pretend that it is, then these stories would make no sense. We would be writing stories from thousands of years ago, and there'd be no way to translate them or have them survive in the modern times. The fact that they do tells us that what we want out of story is almost universal. Understand that and use that. Don't shy away from it. Okay, I'm going to switch to this screen. This is all shit that I taught myself yesterday, and it was fun. But hey, this is like when I learned how to self-publish. I didn't know anything. I barely knew how to write, but I certainly didn't know how to paginate a document. I didn't know how to upload anything. I didn't know what KDP or CreateSpace or Audible or any of that stuff was. The internet is your friend. You can Google anything and just start reading about it. So when I decided, okay, I'm going to put together a video where I want people to be able to see the document I'm working on, have a chat window, have this. Someone out there has made a YouTube video explaining how to do all of this, and there's free software for every bit of it. So if you have an idea for self-promotion, if you want to learn how to publish your own books, sit down and teach yourself. Man, it's so much fun to learn new things. So, okay, this is a short story that I'm working on right now, tentatively called Inheritors. And one thing I will show you, when I'm editing, one of the first things I do is come in here and turn on track changes in Word. And that way, if you make a change, you can see it's highlighted in red there. And you can keep up with what's been adjusted in the text. Everyone knows this stuff, but sometimes I do this when I'm even doing a bit of editing of my own stuff, so I can undo changes. Sometimes you're playing with things and you make it worse and you want to go back. And track changes allows you to realize, like if I make a change here, if I get rid of that word and then come down here and start writing other stuff, then later I realize, okay, I want to keep this new thing I did, but I want to get rid of that old stuff I did. And when you're just editing in the document, there's not a great way to keep things out of order using, Control Z. You just undo in the order you did it. But in this case, I can highlight something. Let's see. I can highlight something old that I want to change, and I can reject this change and keep the new thing that I did. Otherwise, you end up having to copy and paste the new thing to a new document, Control Z to get back to the thing that you changed, and then paste the new bit back in. I think everyone will understand who's been through this, what I'm talking about. It's a pain in the butt. But track changes can be great in your own document, but obviously I use it when I'm editing other people's works because they need to see what I changed. If you're ever editing someone else's work, you never make a change without track changes. Even if it's something that you know is a typo, you don't change someone else's work without their knowledge. There might be some reason that typo might be in dialogue, or could be something that comes up later. Who knows? Never change something without someone's permission. I had that experience with two publishers over the years where I was able to compare and realize, my editor made these changes and didn't even let me know about it. And it doesn't matter if it's right or wrong. It's just once you find out that's happening, then you wonder about the integrity of the rest of your work. So if you're ever editing someone's stuff, always track the change so they can agree or disagree with it. Okay, so here is another example of starting with someone sleeping, a big no-no in writing. And I'll tell you why I think it works and why I started my story this way. Here's the story. The call came in the middle of the night while the child was kicking as if to say, hurry up and answer. Hurry up and get that. That's for me. Okay, really short bit there. What's going on? Okay, there's a phone call coming in the middle of the night while the child was kicking. We know someone's pregnant. And they're kicking as if to say, answer that. That's for me. What I love about this is that obviously no one is calling an unborn human. The phone is not for the kid. So how does this make sense? What's going on in this world? There's parts that understand and parts that make me wonder, okay, I need to read at least the next sentence to find out if the phone call really is for this fetus, and how old is the fetus, and at what point can they receive phone calls? So yeah, I'll read a little bit more, because then I started the dream. This is really just, it's partly me fucking with my editor and doing things you're not supposed to do, but having fun with it. Shanna almost didn't wake up. In her dream, she was driving a car, something she never learned how to do. She was flying down a hill with twists and turns, cliffs on both sides, and no rails. The car would leave the pavement, and she'd be gliding, falling, soaring. The radio was playing Good Night by the Crips, her current favorite song, her ringtone. It was the only good part of any dream she'd had that night. It was how she knew it must be a dream. Good things didn't happen to her. Okay, I'm biased, this is my own writing, but there's a few things going on in these 2 paragraphs that I really like. And one is a little bit of repetition. And this is something I haven't figured out how to teach this, even to myself. It's something you know intuitively. And so it's like asking a guitarist when they play like a blues progression, how did you know to put those things in that order? And they'll say, I have no idea. And when they write a song, it's like, it'll sound beautiful. It's like, where'd you come up with that? And they're like, I don't know where it came from. I think that's honest, but I think that we need to try to dig past that to figure out what makes things sound good so that we can pick up that cadence. And the closest I've found is just reading like a lot of Shakespearean sonnets and listening to this iambic pentameter that he has, where the sentences rise and fall, and they don't ever rise too much or fall too much unless he's trying to convey an emotion, so that you get so used to this calmness that when he violates it, it's to make you feel something. And if you don't have that steadiness, this is like the drummer who's keeping the beat. If you don't have that steadiness, then you can't have the excitement of the drummer doing a solo. If you don't have the refrain, the chorus that comes over and over again, then the bits in the middle between the choruses don't make sense, like don't have anything punchy about them. So there's, at every level of writing, what I just said, which probably doesn't make sense, holds true, that cadence is everything. It happens on the sentence level. It happens on the paragraph level, on the page level, on the chapter level, and on the story level, where you have to have the right cadence. This means almost all your chapters should be similar in length. And if you have a short chapter, it should be because it's making a statement, because there's something crazy happening in that chapter, or some pause you want to make between these other chapters for it to stand out. You can't be random with your chapter length. You can't be random with your paragraph length. One of the things that I like to do is sometimes just scroll through my works like this, and I'm not reading the work. I'm just looking at the indentions here, and I'm not seeing anything like Proust with 5 pages with no paragraphs. Like this stands out to me as I'm scrolling through here. This is a big paragraph for this story. What's going on here that's different? And when you read it, it's really a story. It's a paragraph and a bit of the story about time and not knowing shortcuts, and how, like, there's a reason that this is bigger than everything else, because the anxiety the character is going through is going to be felt as you're wondering, when is this part going to end? How am I going to get to the end of this part? So, you think about those things when you're writing. I know this all sounds absolutely so crazy. Yeah, James is saying this is similar for screenwriters. The look of the page matters as much as the content. 100% true. I would even say the font that you choose to write in will change the way that you write. Writing in a font without a serif versus with the serif, if you think that doesn't have any effect, try writing in Comic Sans or in Impact Bold, and just see how your writing changes. It changes. Your mood changes based on everything. So experiment and find what works for you. But I guess part of the reason for this video series is like not thinking about these things is strange to me. We should be curious about every one of these little questions about our writing. something I like to do early on is not format. I'll show you proper formatting because I've got this is from GM Nair. I reached out to Mr. Nair and got his permission to. This is one of the submissions, and I've had like 500 submissions come in 3 days. It's unbelievable, and so much of what I'm reading is so good that it's making me think, A, how much untapped talent is out there, B, how much more people should be reading to be discovering all this talent, but C, that A, I'm going to learn a whole lot from reading these submissions, and hopefully have something to offer these writers and other writers in return. But a lot of these need to be published somewhere. They need to be submitted. We got to figure out how to get people to trust that these stories are ready and put them up on Amazon for 99 cents or something, or create an anthology out of this or something. But I'm gonna go over this more in a later video because the writing is so good and I want to show why I love it. But I brought it up right now because the formatting, this is proper formatting when you submit something. His name is here, his address, which I blacked out, and phone number, email, word count. It's in Times New Roman. It's double spaced. It's not justified on the right. This is how everyone will tell you to format a document for submission. I 100% agree. Don't mess with the standards. But doesn't mean you have to write in that. I think writing in Times New Roman is, for me, discordant. It's like, it's a difference between playing with plastic strings and metal strings. You got to find what's right for you. But I like putting a drop cap at the beginning of my my paragraphs. I know it's silly, but now I know I'm writing a book. It makes me take it seriously. I want to format my document to look like what I'm aspiring for it to be early on. So big part of formatting and how that makes us better writers, but then knowing how to format it for when you submit it. Doesn't have to be the same thing. Don't write in submission format is my advice. Okay. So you can dissect this down to like really the nitty gritty, but I do want to talk about a couple of things. Okay, the radio is playing Good Night by the Crips. There's no such thing as a song Good Night, and there's no band called the Crips. This is something I see in genre fiction a lot. I've seen it in a lot of the submissions that I've been reading, where we want to, and not just submissions for this project, but stuff from big name pro writers I'm editing for an upcoming series of anthologies. When we want to make reference to a popular work of music, a movie, a book, the lazy thing is to mention one that we know of in our time, which is kind of unrealistic. If your story is taking place 10 years in the future, the fact that they're obsessed with the 80s and talking about your favorite stuff is interesting if that's the point of the entire novel, like Ready Player One. It's lazy if it's just so that we can mention something we know the reader is familiar with. If you need to, if you're doing that because you want them to understand something about sitcoms, it's just as easy to make up a sitcom and mention what it is about that sitcom that you're trying to get across and know that the reader knows what sitcoms are. So knowing that someone has a favorite song and that it's her ringtone and she's hearing it in her dream is the only important part of mentioning a song and a band in this paragraph. Making it one that's in the future and doesn't exist yet starts to create this world and makes you forget that you're reading something from an author who lives in your world. And that's what happens when we're like their favorite, they're hearing Waterfalls by TLC. Then you're like, oh, that's right, the person writing this knows the same stuff that I do. And that draws you out of the story instead of pulling you into the world. Making up the name of a coffee joint that's on every corner and having it like a funny play on words about coffee is better than making it Starbucks in the future. People will know that this coffee shop is just like Starbucks. But the fact that you've taken the time to dream up something new and that you've talked about it like it's real starts eroding every reader's initial reluctance to believe this world. We all start like that, especially editors and acquiring editors who are looking at picking up fiction and publishing it. They're looking for a reason not to believe in this world. So you have to make up your world and your rules in your world, and write about them with such integrity and honesty and confidence that you start to wear away that reluctance to believe you. So that's just one little thing. Yeah. Anyway, what else was I going to show you? Here's another one. This is another short story I'm working on that is going to change. Just a placeholder. We can do that with our titles. Okay, this one is about someone landing on Mars, and they're the 491st person to do it. For me as a genre writer, this is more interesting to me than reading about the first person to land on it. That's such an obvious, I don't know, it's so cliche to find about the person who invented a time machine or who turned on the very first artificial intelligence. It's much more fascinating to say, what does a guy who stays at home and takes care of his kids while his wife is out to work, what does he do with an artificial intelligence? I love the movie Her because it's just a random person who starts having this relationship with an AI, and at some point you realize he's walking down the stairs and he realizes that he's having a conversation with the AI, and she's like, yeah, I'm talking with like this many hundreds of thousands of people right now at the same time. And it's a bigger story. There's this technology that is impacting society, and we chose one lens to view it through. And that's more believable than the idea that, hey, guess what? Like, this is the first person to, do this one thing, and we're going to concentrate on. I don't know. It just doesn't ring as true, and it's not as easy for us to get into. Hold on 1 second. No caption there. Oh, there's all kinds of good advice in the comments. See, a writing group is springing up in the comments, and I love that. Maybe that's just what we need, and not me talking about it. Okay, so the idea behind this is it's almost the 500th person to land on Mars, and the reason I think that's important is because, like, we're thinking about going to Mars now, and the companies are spending billions of dollars trying to get us there, and the excitement of the first people is going to be amazing. Like, almost everyone can name Neil Armstrong. It's amazing how few people know who the second person was to land on the moon, just step on the moon. Like, the gulf between the first and the second is pretty vast. I don't know of any layman who can tell me the third person to step on the moon, or how many people total have stepped on the moon. We care about the first person. That seems like I'm saying that's the kind of story we should tell, but the point of a good story is to think about an angle we haven't thought of before, which is that if this is something about human nature where we remember the first person to do something, but then we stop caring about a thing, then we need to write a Martian story where all of a sudden the dream of getting there is not as exciting as we thought it was going to be. And where I pulled from this story is I have a lot of friends who work in tech, and they know if they got into a company early, what employee number they are. Like, I've got a friend who was like, number 7 at Pinterest, and like they know who number 6 was and who number 8 was, and it's a big deal. It becomes a big deal when you talk about stock options and other stuff, but also for the sense of founding something. And so this is about someone who is landing on Mars. They know they're 491, and they're talking about the fact that everyone who sets foot on Mars knows what number they are, and that they're jostling in the lander to be as close as possible to that door to have a higher number, and they're trying not to be an obvious asshole about it, but they're all counting, and they all know. And there's this is what I try to figure out with my own writing and what I look for in other people's writing is tell me something that's never happened, because we've never like jostled in a Mars lander to see who can be the highest number coming out. Tell me something that's never happened, but as soon as I read it, I think that is exactly how it would happen. There's no doubt in my mind that this is human nature and that we would all be doing this and we would all try to make it look like we were doing this. And there'd be one person who didn't give a fuck, who was like, no, I'm going to be doing this. And there's something about reading about a fantastical setting and believing it that sucks us in, makes us ready to believe everything that comes after. And figuring out where to start our story and how to tell a vignette about our world and our human nature is the key, I think, to getting people sucked in and to caring about this person and wanting to know more about them and wanting to know about their world and their story. So, that's my writing advice for that one. For that kind of an opening is tell something that's never happened, make it believable, make us know that that's precisely how it would happen. All right, I don't know how long I've been going, but that feels like enough. Yeah, man, good feeling. That's about an hour. So I'm going to leave it off there. This is just a glimpse of what I plan on doing. I'm going to get these submissions. I'm going to take some time every day to read through these and start collecting the ones that I think we have a lot to read about, a lot to learn from, myself and other writers. And then I'm going to go through them, talk about what I love, and make some track changes, edits. I'll give you an example, actually. We'll go ahead and do this just for this opening of Thesis Defense, which is such a great title for a short story because no one wants to read anyone's thesis defense. It's the antithesis of exciting reading. And so it's such a punch to the gut that like you can open up a short story called Thesis Defense. It's preying on our expectations because normally you'd want to write, come up with a title that's like, that sounds nuts. I'm dying to know what the hell that is. And sometimes you want it to be completely different, like wool, and you're like, I do not want to read about sheep's wool, or knitting, so I'm not going to read that book. So playing with expectations is cool, but I'm going to read the opening paragraph or two. I'm going to show one thing that I would change, and everything else I think about this is amazing. Reese Winston Garrett wasn't known for making practical decisions. Dropping out of college to become a galactic treasure hunter was a standout example. But, to his credit, he always committed to his decisions. Except the decision to have gone to college in the first place. That was a mistake he'd never make again. Even now, his return to his alma mater, Gatherton University and Coffee House, was not to resume his studies. No, Reese was after a different quarry. Rumors had swirled about his former archaeology professor, Dr. Emil Andares. Former in the sense that Reese had audited the class for a day before deciding to drop out. He was a complicated man. Just one more sentence, because this is the first thing I would change. That aside, Dr. Andares had last been seen drowning his sorrows in a bottle before tragically drowning himself in his own vomit. Okay, so much to love about this opening. This kind of humor is right up my alley. While there is objective good writing, it doesn't mean that everyone's going to love it subjectively. Even people who don't like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy kind of humor can read this and say, this is like almost error-free writing, and it has great flow and cadence. Whether or not it's for you is a different matter. This is both for me. It's great prose, great plot. And the first thing we get about this Reese guy is that he wasn't known for making practical decisions. I like that about him. I think a lot of people would, and I want to know more about the mistakes and some of the decisions he's made. But look at also how clear this writing is. There's no attempt to write purple prose or to talk about a sunrise or anything crazy. It's just, here's the name of your protagonist, and here's one of the features about them that's fascinating. It's so clean and clear and simple, and this is where we should start with our writing. This is how we should teach students of writing to get out the gate with their stories, is stick to how you would tell a story to a friend by email. Second sentence, dropping out of college to become a galactic treasure hunter was a standout example. Okay, this is, instead of saying galactic treasure hunters are, and then a huge info dump, we drop galactic treasure hunter as something that a lot of people have done, or that it's a thing you can do, and that you should already know that this is a thing if you're the reader. I love that. I love that he dropped out of college. It appeals to me because I dropped out of college. A lot of people who went to college probably wish they had dropped out of college. A lot of people who didn't go to college probably wish they'd gone just a little bit and then stopped going. So there's a lot to like about this protagonist out the gate, but also a galactic treasure hunter. We're going to be in space looking for treasure, and whoever's writing this is writing it with some wit. I'm in. Like, just give me a trilogy of this guy doing whatever he does. Okay. Also, the naming the college Gatherton University and Coffee House is brilliant. I love that. And okay, this is the first thing, and this is such a minor quibble, but this is how our editing should work with our own work and how I edit with other people. That aside, Dr. Andrades had last been seen drowning his sorrows in a bottle. Had last been seen. This is the first, it sounds so minor. Most people look at that and say, that's perfectly fine. Grammatically, it's correct. It sounds great, had last been seen. I think it's a little too staccato and too much short words with hard beats at the end. And so I would play with this and just say, Dr. Andrades was last seen. Oh. Make sure my track changes is on. That aside, Dr. Andrades was last seen drowning his sorrows. Such a minor, like, what did we change? The meaning of the sentence is no different. Why is one better than the other? That's something I want to try to figure out. That's something I'm really curious about, because to me, there's so many S's, so many soft S's in this sentence. That aside, Dr. Andrades was last seen drowning his sorrows. That cadence has this repetition of flow with no repetition of word that's so important. Lack of repetition of flow and repetitions of words is like so bad, and we'll show you that in another series. I'll just make up some sentences to show you how that can be really bad to the ears. The difference between that and that aside, Dr. Andrades had last been seen drowning his sorrows. When we get ready to get with drowning his sorrows in a bottle before tragically drowning himself in his own vomit is such a good ending. But there's a lot going on with the syllables and the words in that part of the sentence that we don't want to give the brain, the reader's brain, anything to do before then. And had last been seen is a little bit of work to put things in order to figure out what happened. We're giving them a little work, and they're having to hold that, because we don't put the sentence together till we get to the period. We hold all this information, we get to the period, and our brain sorts it and orders it, and then we digest it before we move to the next sentence. So if we give people work in the beginning of a sentence that's not important to what we want to deliver, then we might fill up their capacity before we get to the stuff that we want them to be able to organize and work on. The more we can deliver our medicine with a coating of sugar, just like make it go down so palatably before we get to the good stuff, the better we're going to perform in our storytelling endeavor. So was last seen for me is just feels right in the sentence. It has more of the same cadence, the same sort of consonant choice. And this is the kind of edit that I'm making on my fourth or fifth pass through the work. Now I'm getting down to where I'm listening to the music. And that is where we're going to end this video, and we're going to pick that up next time when we talk about how editing stories is a lot like editing films, and people don't take that seriously enough. And we'll go through some more of these stories, and we will read some more stuff. We'll have some more chats. I'm going to look at your comments, and I'll put links to my favorite books in the video once this all goes live. I have no idea how this is going to work. It's going to be an hour, maybe every 2 weeks or so, and then I don't know, half an hour per day of me reading, which I love to do anyway. And we'll see what becomes of it. But hopefully it'll help somebody. I could have used all this stuff back in the day when I was trying to figure out how to be a good writer, or at least a better writer. And yeah, hope it's useful. Thanks for tuning in. Love you guys. James wants to know what time the next one is. Is it random? It'll probably be random because my schedule is crazy. I've got a lot of trips coming up and obligations, and yeah, it'll be when I can make time. But could be that I have a week that's free and I do a bunch of these. But I'll try to post something on social media when it's going to happen live, though you might find that it's better not watching it live. All right, that's it. Love you guys. Talk to you later. Now I just have to figure out, how do you stop this thing? You can watch me try to figure this out live for the first time. In stream. I'm going to try that.